Good morning. Happy Easter. And thank you for joining us this morning in our Florida Community of Mindfulness, both physical and virtual meditation hall. My name is Angie, and I am in the hall with a number of our members, including I want a special call out to our resident Max. Happy birthday. And his parents, John and Wee, are here with us in the hall today. So it's very joyful to have the family here. So welcome. Yeah, so Easter, in the Christian tradition, it's a time to celebrate resurrection. It's also a time of spring. And as we sit in the hall this morning, we can hear the birds outside the windows chirping. We can see some new flowers beginning to bloom. I know as we leave the warm Florida climate, many people across the country are seeing new blossoms, new leaves. So, traditionally, this is a time associated with growth, with new life, maybe with rebirth. And I think after a year like the last 12 months, a lot of us are ready to feel, this reemergence. It's been a difficult year. Social isolation, a lot of anxiety about getting sick or about people we love getting sick, and being separated from people that we love. So just personally, some people's jobs affected, the way we work, the way we communicate, not being able to hug people, except maybe someone right in your household. So yeah, it's been a difficult year. And it's been difficult, as we all know in our society. Just a time of such strife and such polarization. A very painful election process. Violence against people due to race and other issues. So it's been a dark 12 months for many of us. So now in spring, just as nature's coming back to life, a lot of us are getting vaccinated. Hopefully, spring break excluded, we'll see the COVID infection numbers begin to decrease, and people are beginning to come out again, starting to emerge, looking at going back to maybe not the way we were before, but to be coming out and starting to be with each other, touch each other again more. I'm looking forward to going up to Asheville in a couple of weeks with my mother and my sisters. My mother has been in her retirement community for the past 12 months, pretty much in her apartment. Even the dinners that, they are so important, I think, for people her age, were discontinued for the past year. People had their food brought to their rooms. So we had a lot of phone calls, tried to teach her to FaceTime and Zoom. That was challenging, but sweet. I had a couple of glimpses of her sort of drive-bys. She's up in Athens, but, I know I just worried about her. And I know a lot of us have worried about people like that who really have been very isolated with their television, unfortunately, which I don't think was, watering the most wholesome of seeds over the last 12 months. So I'm going to see her, and she's had her suitcase packed for weeks. She's really excited to be coming up with myself and my sisters. Yeah, and to see people, I lost a cousin. I know many of us have lost people, but haven't seen my aunt and uncle, so they're going to be up with us too. And, just to be able to hug somebody. And again, I know I'm not alone. It's been hard, and now I feel so joyful. Who would have thought a hug would bring such joy a year ago? I mean, we just took for granted, yes, see you later, see you next week, the next time we get together. And not realizing, wow, it's just precious, precious. It's funny, Fred often says, we'll say, "We'll see you tomorrow," or he'll tell his daughter or his grandchildren, they'll say, "See you next week, Grandpa," and he'll say, "May it be so." And it's not to be morbid, but just to realize that we just never know, right? When we're gonna see someone again, if we're gonna wake up tomorrow, if our lives are impermanent. So, today, after a hard year, I think a lot of us feel a lot of hopefully hope, a lot of joy. Um, some people I think are a little afraid to come out. I mean, I have to admit, it's been pretty comfortable being at home on Zoom calls with your pajama bottoms on. and So there are certain aspects of this isolation that we've learned, hey, some things are not a bad idea. Maybe more of us can work at home. Maybe we don't need to be running out all the time. It is kind of nice in addition to not getting COVID. It's nice not to have a cold for a year or anything else. But yet we do want to come out and we do want to reconnect with our family. We want to reconnect with, I think most of us want to reconnect with the world. I've talked to so many people recently, including at some lovely Sangha dinner parties, who are activists or who've been very involved. And, a lot of those activities have been curtailed or they've had to be done in a different way. But now, again, we're kind of looking out in the world to reconnect with our families and to maybe get more involved in, issues that may be meaningful to us, whether it's climate change. Issues with race, voting rights. There's just so many ways to engage in the world. So I was just thinking, because I'm always thinking, what can I do that's meaningful? I love the Dharma Hall, but during the time of COVID, I've been writing letters, to people to get them to vote, trying to do things that are meaningful. I know other people have made phone calls and done all sorts of stuff, but as we can now reemerge again, and we look at this world, and particularly we look at this country, which has been so divided. I mean, 47% of Americans voted for the candidate who was not elected to president. I mean, it's not as if we have an election and all of a sudden everybody's in agreement if things go our way and we're happy again. So we look out and we say, wow, there's work to be done. There's healing to be done in this country. And so some of us, I think, may start, particularly because it's spring and it's becoming healthier, and maybe we're ready for new beginnings and to do that. So I was just reflecting, how do we do that? How do we go back out into the world with our heart in the right place? What wisdom do we receive from our teachers about how to go back after this period of isolation? How do we go back sort of into the marketplace in the most skillful, loving way that we actually make a difference? And who better to go to than Thich Nhat Hanh? This is such a beautiful book. I'm going to share a few things from it. Thich Nhat Hanh at Home in the World. But I remembered back to, right after 9/11, 2001, when things seemed so fractured in the world after the bombings, the airplanes, the subsequent war in Iraq, um, and a lot of his advice that was really meaningful to me at the time, because that was also a time of healing. I worked for a company that lost 200 people in the World Trade Center, and I had a number of close friends who were lost, and it would be very easy to have gotten very angry at the time, and a lot of people, including our government, did get very angry. And so look where that anger took us, years later, and we still have all these problems in the Middle East that we created causes for at that time based on our anger. But Thich Nhat Hanh, I remember at that time, came out with long letters talking to us, his students, talking to the world about, having understanding, seeing causes and conditions, engaging with love. So I went back and I found an interview in Lion's Roar magazine from 2003, was not too long after 9/11, earlier in the year. And Ty was interviewed by John Malcolm on the topic of engaged Buddhism, because at that time, people still felt anger. They wanted to get out in the world. They wanted to do something. And Ty gave some really lovely, beautiful advice that I thought was really relevant today. So I thought I'd just read some of Malcolm's questions and some of Ty's answers that I thought seemed, meaningful in terms of how we are sitting today um, in this country that's been divisive, um, in an environment that's been fearful. How do we re-engage in a way that we do so without fear, without anxiety, with love, with connection, and in a way that meaningfully could actually help the world. So I'm going to kind of just meander through um, some of what's in here, and hopefully you'll find some of it meaningful. So one of the first questions that Malcolm asked Thich Nhat Hanh, or Thai, as he's called, teacher, he said, "What is engaged Buddhism? Will you describe the origins of engaged Buddhism and how you became involved in compassion-based social change?" And it's an interesting question because people often think of Thai as an activist, but he really, and this is, Fred spent so much time with him, he really didn't think of himself that way. It was more, I'm a Buddhist, and it's my job on the Bodhisattva path to alleviate the suffering of other people. So if there are bombs being dropped or whatever's happening, it's my job to engage and to help do that. So he didn't view it as something separate from his path. So in response to that question, Thich Nhat Hanh said, "Engaged Buddhism is just Buddhism. When bombs begin to fall on people, you cannot stay in the meditation hall all of the time." And here, Ty was talking about the bombs that fell on Vietnam in the 60s and 70s. We can think of the bombs as today in any type of assault, whether it's an assault on the Capitol, it's an assault on human rights, whatever we're experiencing. So Ty goes on to say, meditation is about the awareness of what is going on, not only in your body and in your feelings, but all around you. When I was a novice in Vietnam, we young monks witnessed the suffering caused by the war. So we were very eager to practice Buddhism in such a way that we could bring it into society. That was not easy because the tradition, and this was Buddhism, in Asia and particularly in Vietnam, does not directly offer engaged Buddhism. They kind of stayed in the monastery in those days. But Thai did it differently. He said we had to do it by ourselves. That was the birth of engaged Buddhism. Buddhism has to do with your daily life, with your suffering, and with the suffering of the people around you. We have to learn how to help a wounded child while still practicing mindful breathing. You should not allow yourself to get lost in action. Action should be meditation at the same time. So I think it's meaningful in our lives because, we don't have to be doing something big like rescuing, people who've, been assaulted by bombs, rebuilding villages as they were back then, but we have suffering people all around us. We may have suffering people in our home. We may be suffering. There may be suffering in our workplace. And we can take that out, into wider and wider fields of so-called activism, but engaged Buddhism is just simply, as Thai says, bringing it into our lives and engaging with our lives and with the people in our lives to reduce suffering. So that's, pure and simple engaged Buddhism. It's what we live when we walk this path. And then Malcolm asked him about the danger of bringing anger into our engagement with the world. So he asked, "What's your view of the current peace movement in the United States?" And again, this was in 2003. So, in response to 9/11, the government was, I don't remember the chronology, but, we were going to invade Iraq. Maybe we had done so already, but really kind of waging war against a number of countries in retaliation. And there were quite a few people that were speaking up for peace and protesting against that at the time. And Ty says, "People were very compassionate and willing to support us in ending the war in Vietnam during the 60s. But the peace movement in America did not have enough patience. People became angry very quickly because what they were doing wasn't bringing about what they wanted. So people were engaging, but there was an attachment to an outcome, and people got angry when they didn't see the results they wanted. So Ty continues to say there was a lot of anger and violence in the peace movement. Nonviolence and compassion are the foundations of a peace movement. If you don't have enough peace and understanding and loving kindness within yourself, your actions will not truly be for peace. Everyone knows that peace has to begin with yourself, but not many people know how to do it. So, that really struck me in terms of particularly the time leading up to the election and how much anger I saw in the country and how much anger I saw in myself, to be honest. We heard angry words from our president. We heard angry words from his supporters. But we had a lot of, people on both sides, no matter how you viewed it, had so much anger. I'd go onto Facebook and, dear friends who I know are wonderful people would just be posting, you know, things that if you didn't happen to agree with that viewpoint, you might feel under assault. They weren't peaceful postings. And I posted a few things like that myself. And fortunately, I have a son who's very kind of middle of the road moderate who likes to call me on my Facebook posting. So a couple of times he's like, wow, you think about how somebody might feel if they don't agree with you, whether you think you're being high-minded or not. And I realized, yeah, I am not taking care of my own anger. And there were many times where I did feel a lot of anger coming up over things that were happening, particularly last year. So it's important that we see that anger and that we not bring it into anything that we're trying to heal, whether it's relationships with family or it's relationships in the world, whether it's environmental change. Having been involved for many years with Sierra Club, again, a lot of very well-meaning activists, but a lot of anger and a lot of burnout because of it. So, we really need to see, what is here. And then they kind of moved on to the topic of not separating our practice from what we call our engaged work. So Malcolm said, people often feel that they need to choose between being engaged in social change or working on personal and spiritual growth. What would you say to those people? And Ty said, I think that view is rather dualistic. The practice should address suffering, the suffering within yourself and the suffering around you. They are linked to each other. When you go to the mountain and practice alone, you don't have the chance to recognize the anger, jealousy, and despair that's in you. That's why it's good that you encounter people, so you know these emotions, so that you can recognize them and try to look into their nature. If you don't know the roots of these afflictions, you cannot see the path leading to their cessation. That's why suffering is very important for our practice. Fred says a lot to us. It's very easy to look like a Buddha, when we are sitting in the meditation hall for 2 hours a week on the cushion, side by side with each other. And, we cross our legs and, a half smile. And we're happy to be here. So it's in our hearts too. But, when we are trying to figure out why for the umpteenth time the irrigation system is broken, or we're having discussions about COVID safety protocols, or, any number of things that we come here even to the center as practitioners to do, we can be challenged. We're challenged by our own views, our own preferences, the way we think things should be, what we think is right. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to bring this practice, to life, but also to look inside ourselves to see what's going on. Our lives really are our practice. And as I mentioned before, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who get very burnt out when they go to the world and they bring their energy and their good intentions to their activism. People become angry or they just become tired. They become discouraged. And there's so many examples in Thai's book about going to villages and rebuilding them and then having the Americans bomb them again, rebuilding it again, bombing it again. It's very difficult sometimes, this work of helping other people, of being a bodhisattva. So this question of, is my practice in the meditation hall or is my practice out there helping people? As Thai's saying, it has to be both, because if we don't continue that practice in the meditation hall, if we don't keep, Fred always says, recharging ourselves. He says, FCM is our recharging station. This is where we come to recharge our heart, to remember that we're trying to take unconditional love into the world. This is where we come to be nourished, to be inspired, to be bodhisattvas. And if we lose touch with that, if we just go out into the world, we can be worn down so easily. So as Thai said, it's not dualistic. Our practice is both in here and it's also without. One of the things that Thai did that's, I think, such a beautiful example here was during the war, he had what he created, the School of Youth and Social Service. And basically, these were peace workers, social workers of a type that under Thai's leadership went out to minister to the victims of the war. And they refused to take sides for the North or the South, which meant they were viewed by suspicion by both sides, had a very hard time sometimes. But their whole mission was to just help people that were suffering from the war, and to protest and try to get other people to aid in stopping the war. And one thing he insisted on was that everybody involved in the movement have regular days of mindfulness. He felt like they needed to come into the hall, they needed to feel the precepts, the 14 mindfulness trainings, the 5 mindfulness trainings in their heart, to be supported so that they could go out and rebuild that village when it was bombed for the 4th time in a row. And there was actually an article somewhere that I found online in 2016 where the author went back to Saigon, and he found a number of men who had been young and involved in the School of Youth for Social Service back in the 60s, who had worked under Thai, and he interviewed them about their experience. And I thought it was just kind of lovely what they said. The question that the interviewer said was, "How did you keep your hope alive? It was such a difficult time." And the response was, all of them agree in pointing to Thich Nhat Hanh's spiritual leadership as a key factor in keeping their hope alive. They said, "We have learned to be very respectful toward our master Thai," one of them fondly recollects. "Because of him, we have grown love and nurtured the good inside each of us." Another one shared that they learned from Thai to cultivate hope and belief inside of us, because when we have that, we can still believe in the capacity of everyone to create happiness. And again, just, remembering they were caught between this incredible violence and killing with the Vietnamese, with the Americans, before that with the French. So they had had years of this. But he says we can believe in the capacity of everyone to create happiness, which is so unlike how people normally feel in these situations. They feel so separate. They feel like the other one is bad or evil, but Thai taught, no, everyone has those seeds of goodness. One of the men at our table, who was a monastic, who lives in the same pagoda where the School of Youth for Social Service was once located, told me he kept his hope alive because since the age of 15, he received a lot of wisdom from Master Thai and respected a person that had created something that affirmed the value of life. The 14 mindfulness trainings taught the social workers to understand and love, and to help by freely giving all the energies of body and mind. The youth followed the ideas of practicing a Buddha mind, unconditional loving, and attaining peace and happiness in the present moment while wishing it to everyone else. I mean, what a strong energy that is, to, no matter how you feel about the people that you disagree with, the people whose actions that we don't approve of, the people who may have hurt other people, that could we bring them an unconditional love and truly wish for their happiness. And it's not to condone actions that injure people. It's not to say we don't have to act, but to do this engagement with that kind of heart, to me is so beautiful. And they continue to say, the youth followed the ideas of practicing a Buddha mind. Well, I just read that, but I'll read it again because I think it's wonderful. Unconditional loving and attaining peace and happiness in the present moment while wishing it to everyone else. All of these ideas made them fearless. One of them tells me a Vietnamese saying to illustrate the point. And in English, the saying was, when you do the right thing, life or death doesn't matter. When you do the wrong thing, death matters a lot because you feel you haven't finished your work. So, in this question, in these quotes, we can learn from Thai that, it's so important to always nourish peace and love in our hearts. We do loving kindness meditation, a lot at our center. Fred does it every Tuesday night, and it can seem like a nice practice, but it's really an essential practice if we want to create peace in the world. It is so important because it's hard sometimes. It's really hard with the things we see in the world. We really need to nurture that in our hearts. Thank you, Bill. It's nice to get a bell. I realize when Fred is up here, he has little breaks. He unscrews the cap of his tea and he pours the tea mindfully. I should bring a thermos next time. Uh, so again, the next question was, the importance of understanding the world with deep listening and understanding. So Malcolm asked Ty, when the World Trade Center was destroyed, you were asked what you would say to those responsible. You answered that you would listen compassionately and deeply to understand their suffering. And I remember that. I remember him writing a letter to President Bush at the time, asking him, people are suffering. If people go to the lengths that these people have gone through to fly airplanes into your buildings, there is suffering. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that that his advice was listened to at the time, but it was so wise. So Ty says, you would listen compassionately and deeply to understand their suffering. Tell me about the practice of deep listening and how you think it helps you. Well, I'm sorry, this is still Malcolm asking the question, where he said Ty had told him he'd listen compassionately, and Malcolm said, tell me about this practice of deep listening and how you think it helps in personal situations as well as in situations like the World Trade Center attacks. And again, just before I read Ty's question or his response, this just struck me as such a big issue in our country right now. We don't listen to each other. We all think we're right, and we don't want to hear so often what the other people have to say. Whatever the heck cancel culture means, that's become a term that's kind of morphed all over the place, it seems, these days. But, we oftentimes don't want to hear if somebody disagrees or they say something that we think is politically incorrect. But, we're not here to judge everyone. We're here to understand. And when we understand, then we can start determining, well, what change is needed? Where is there a cause that needs to be changed and a new cause brought in? But on all of these very divisive issues we have, guns, no guns, voting rights, again, we can feel like we sit on the right side of the issue, but there are a substantial number of people in this country who have a very different view. And if we don't stop and understand their views, we can elect, as Fred gives this example so often, there was Bush, and he said, and then Bush created Obama, and then Obama created Trump, and then Trump created Biden. I mean, the pendulum swings back and forth, and we try to cure everything with political change. And sure, we feel good when political change goes the way we think it should go. But then we see over time that we haven't changed the hearts and minds of people because we haven't stopped and we haven't listened deeply to really get to the underlying sickness that's in our society. So Thich says the practice of deep listening should be directed toward oneself first. I love the way he always starts with us. We're all ready to go out and fix somebody else, right? But Thich says, we need to listen to ourselves. He says, if you don't know how to listen to your own suffering, it will be difficult to listen to the suffering of another person or another group of people. So yeah, if we're angry and we don't listen to ourselves, it's going to be very hard through that filter of anger to truly hear somebody else. Thich said, I have recommended that America listen to herself first because there's a lot of suffering within her borders. There are so many people who believe they are victims of discrimination and injustice, and they believe they've never been heard and understood. And that is so true. There are so many people in this country and groups of people who've been discriminated against, who have faced economic, safety, other issues that have really created suffering in their lives. And so for a lot of us here today, we've been concerned about that. And a lot of us have been very active, kind of in that direction. So I think it's easy for most of us to listen to that type of suffering and to respond. But I think it's harder for us to listen to all these other Americans that we may not agree with on issues. There are, there are lots of things being written, lots of people looking deeply into why do people vote a certain way or why do they see things the way they do. And just one example, because there are many reasons why people supported different candidates in the last election, but one area that's gotten attention are white males, typically not college educated, who feel at risk on sort of, you might call it the caste system in America, that they're losing status. They're worried about, there are people who may not have been very mobile, that have been trained to do one particular type of job, and they're afraid, that other people are being lifted up and they're going to go, and again, this is all samsara. These are people who don't know about the teachings of non-self and so forth. So self is very strong in most people. And to feel like that self is being diminished, that self is being threatened is very fearful for a lot of people. And so, are we willing to listen deeply to the suffering of these other people, to come to the table and talk? And we might say, well, we don't think they're going to listen to us, but somebody has to start the listening. There is, I think I've mentioned this before in talks, but there's a institution that was started in Northern Ireland during the time of the Troubles and all the war there, called Corrymeela. And Corrymeela exists to bring together groups of people who really see things totally differently. And they start off by finding common ground, such as, I have children, you have children. We care about our children. We love our children. We want our children to have a future. And so maybe in a conversation here, we want our children to have clean air. We want our children to, not live in climates that are intemperate. And then, from there, you can move out to a broader view of some of these issues. But, finding common ground is just something that is only done through deep listening. And it's really the way that we're going to, as a country, as a globe, ever find ourselves through, the terrible strife and anger that exists right now. So Thich said, and Thich talks a lot here about understanding in causes and conditions. We have to understand, just like the group I just talked about, what creates them? What's the fear? What's their life story that's created them? And so I wanted to read, this is just a wonderful book that Fred said, why don't you look in this and see if anything inspires you, since you're going to share from Thich Nhat Hanh. I think it might have been published in around 2018, but it's called Thich Nhat Hanh at Home in the World. And it's actually a bunch of short pieces about Thai's life, but his encounters with different people. And so it really tells you a lot about him. It's just beautiful to read. And in here, he has a section, many of us are familiar with his poem, Call Me by My True Names. But here he actually has more of the background of what happened at that time. And again, the way he looked at this and then subsequently wrote the poem to me was very meaningful. So it's 2.5 pages called Call Me by My True Names. In the early years of my exile in France, I learned of an 11-year-old girl escaping from Vietnam with her family and other boat people. She was raped by a pirate right there on the boat. Her father tried to intervene, but the pirate threw her father into the sea. After the child was raped, she jumped into the ocean to commit suicide. We received the news of this tragedy one day while we were working in our Buddhist peace delegation office in Paris. I was so upset I could not sleep. I felt anger, blame, and despair. That evening in sitting meditation, I visualized myself being born as a baby boy into a very poor fishing family on the coast of Thailand. My father was a fisherman. He couldn't read. He had never gone to school or to the temple. He had never received any Buddhist teaching or any kind of education. The politicians, educators, and social workers in Thailand had never helped my father. My mother also couldn't read or write, and she didn't know how to raise her children. My father's family had been poor fishermen for many generations. My grandfather and my great-grandfather had been fishermen too. When I turned 13, I also became a fisherman. I had never gone to school. I had never felt loved or understood, and I lived in chronic poverty that persisted from one generation to the next. Then one day, another young fisherman says to me, "Let's go out into the ocean. There are boat people who pass near here, and they often carry gold and jewelry, sometimes even money. Just one trip and we can be free from this poverty." I accept this invitation, thinking, we only need to take a little bit of their jewelry. It won't do any harm, and then we can be free from this poverty. So I became a pirate. The first time I go out, I'm not even aware that I've become a pirate. Out on the ocean, I start to see the other pirates raping young women on the boats. I had never touched a young woman. I had never even thought about holding hands or going out with a young woman. But then on one boat, there was a very beautiful young woman and no policeman there to stop me. I had seen other people doing it, and I asked myself, why don't I try it too? This is my chance to try the body of a young woman. And so I do. If you were there on the boat and had a gun, you might have shot me, but shooting me wouldn't help me. Nothing had ever taught me how to love, how to understand, how to see the suffering of others. My father and mother were not taught this either. I don't know what was wholesome and what was unwholesome. I didn't understand cause and effect. I was living in the dark. If you had a gun, you could shoot me and I would die, but you wouldn't be able to help me at all. And then Ty, kind of coming out of that reflection, says, as I continued sitting, I saw hundreds of babies being born that night along the coast of Thailand in similar circumstances, many of them baby boys. If the politicians and cultural ministers could look deeply, they would see that within 20 years, those babies would become pirates. When I was able to see that, I understood the actions of the pirate. When I put myself in the situation of being born into a family that was uneducated and poor from one generation to the next, I saw that I would not be able to avoid becoming a pirate. When I saw that, my hatred vanished, and I could feel compassion for that pirate. When I saw those babies being born and growing up with no help, I knew that I had to do something so they would not become pirates. The energy of a bodhisattva, a compassionate being with limitless love, grew inside me. I didn't suffer anymore. I could embrace not only the suffering of the 11-year-old child who was raped, but also the suffering of the pirate. When you address me as Venerable Nhat Hanh, I answer yes. When you call the name of the child who was raped, I also answer yes. If you call the name of the pirate, I will also say yes. Depending on where I was born and under what circumstances I grew up, I might have been the girl or I might have been the pirate. I am the child in Uganda or the Congo, all skin and bones, my 2 legs as thin as bamboo sticks. And I am also the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to the Congo. Those poor children in the Congo do not need bombs. They need food to eat. But here in the US, we live by producing bombs and guns. And if we want others to buy guns and bombs, then we have to create wars. If you call the name of the child in the Congo, I answer yes. If you call the name of those who produce the bombs and guns, I also answer yes. When I'm able to see that I am all these people, my hatred disappears, and I am determined to live in such a way that I can help the victims and also help those who create and perpetuate wars and destruction. So again, this is one of, I would say, many beautiful stories, some about his time in the war, but all about his life, Thich Nhat Hanh, at home in the world. And yeah, it's really a treasure. So just, kind of finishing up this deep listening question, I've meandered quite a bit with this, but there's always so much that Ty has to say that just brings us back over and over again to, this is the way, this is the only way that we're going to move into peace with ourselves and others. So this was it back in 2003. He told Malcolm, my proposal's concrete. We have to set up a group of people, a kind of parliament, to practice listening to the suffering of America. It's my conviction that there are people in America who are capable of listening deeply with compassion in their hearts. We have to identify them and ask them to come and help us. That's all of us and others. It's nice to know we know how to do that, right? This country needs us right now. Then we ask the people who suffer to come forward and tell us what they have in their hearts. They'll have to tell us everything, and it won't be easy for those listening. If America can practice this within her own borders, she will learn a lot. The insight will be enormous, and based on that insight, we can start actions that can repair the damage done in the past. If America succeeded in that, she could bring that practice to the international level. The fact is that people know America has the capacity to hit very hard and make people suffer. But if America does not hit, that brings her more respect and gives her more authority. So again, I just find that very inspirational. There's no limit to the bodhisattva work we can do because we know people don't feel listened to in this country. I stay on certain email loops of people I've known in the past who have very different views than I do, just because I want to know, what are people thinking? What's going on? And some of them are super conservative, which is, I guess, not where I'd put myself on the political spectrum. But I appreciate hearing their views. And what I hear right now is they're very angry. They feel totally diminished. They don't feel like they were heard. They feel sold out. And we can judge, we can rationalize, we can kind of go through all this analysis. But the truth is that there are a lot of people who are suffering and who are angry. And, we can hear them. We can begin to have these dialogues. So the last question was about listening when we're angry. And Malcolm said, in Western psychology, we're taught that if we're angry, we can release that anger by, say, yelling or hitting a pillow. I remember when I was young, that was the big thing, like this therapy. You just hit your pillow, until your anger is all out of you. And I'm not sure. I'm sure that was proven to not be effective. So Malcolm says, in your book, Anger, Wisdom for Cooling the Flames, you offer a criticism of this method. Why do you feel that this doesn't help get rid of anger? And Thich Nhat Hanh says, in Buddhist psychology, we speak of consciousness in terms of seeds. We have a seed of anger in us. We have a seed of compassion in us. The practice is to help the seed of compassion to grow and the seed of anger to shrink. When you express your anger, you think that you're getting anger out of your system, but that's not true. When you express your anger, either verbally or with physical violence, you're feeding the seed of anger and it becomes stronger in you. It's a dangerous practice. That's why recognizing the seed of anger and trying to neutralize it with understanding and compassion is the the only way to reduce the anger in us. If you don't understand the cause of your anger, you can never transform it. And I don't need to say anything to our community about watering seeds because Fred has been teaching this kind of nonstop, I think, for the last few months. But, just once again, every thought we have, every moment, our actions of body, speech, and mind, everything's leaving an imprint. Seeds are being watered, wholesome seeds, unwholesome seeds. And it's our practice to be very aware of what we're watering and to water what we want to grow. So there were so many wise messages from Fred in that from Fred. Well, there's so many wise messages from Fred too in all of this. I felt like everything I was thinking about was kind of almost channeling from him, but so many wise messages from Ty from that interview. And the last paragraph I wanted to read and then from him and then close just kind of brings us back to the topic of resurrection. Because in Living Buddha, Living Christ, and then also in his book, I think, No Fear, No Death, he talks about what does resurrection mean from a Buddhist perspective. And so I'll just share one paragraph that I thought was lovely there. And he talks about resurrection in Buddhism as a practice. The practice of resurrection or remanifestation is possible for all of us. Our practice is always to resurrect ourselves. And he's talking about moment to moment, going back to the mind and the body with the help of mindful breathing and walking. This will produce our true presence in the here and now. Then we can become alive again. We will be like dead people reborn. We're free from the past. We're free from the future. And we are capable of establishing ourselves in the here and now. So it's interesting. He's saying when we're living in the past and the future, we're like dead people because we're not in contact. We're not in touch directly with the world. We're living in our thoughts about the world. So he's saying we're resurrected. We're reborn every moment that we pull out of that deadness of thought and we come back to life, to presence. He goes on to say, we are fully present in the here and now and we are truly alive. That is the basic practice of Buddhism. Whether you eat or drink, or breathe, or walk, or sit, you can practice resurrection. Always allow yourself to be established in the here and now, fully present, fully alive. That is the real practice of resurrection. So to me, again, that's just the practice we do here all the time of mindfulness and meditation. Bill said, check your mind to us during meditation. Are we in that dead zone of the past or the future? Or are we alive in the moment right now? When we go into the past, when we start living in our thoughts, that's where ego hangs out. That's where everything we see in the world is being seen through the lens of self. And we know how dangerous that is if everything we see in the world is being looked at in terms of how does this affect me? We had that illustrated by our past president. I mean, it was fascinating and frightening to watch what happens when that is that big in someone. So when we come back to the present, when we resurrect ourselves, we drop that thinking, we're simply here, we're simply present to whatever is here. So that is our practice. So today, Easter Sunday, springtime, some of this may feel a little heavy, but I think it's actually very supportive of reminders from Thich Nhat Hanh and our teachers that, through these practices, we can blossom, we can reemerge, and we have this energy, we have this wisdom to, in whatever way we are engaged in, our engaged Buddhism takes, whether it's with our families, our neighbors, our workplace, whether we bring it into a wider area of the world. Because we have the marvelous fortune of having encountered these teachings and this path, and because we are awakening, we have the capacity to help transform the world. So with those words and with deep gratitude to Thich Nhat Hanh, I will bow and Thank you for listening, and would invite you, if you have comments or questions or something that's a practice for you of how you are with your engaged Buddhism that you'd like to share, please just chat it in, and Maggie will share it. Yeah, anybody in the hall have a question or anything you'd like to share?
Thank you so much for that wonderful, relevant talk. Question here: where can we find the interview online or book that you are referring to?
Yeah, so the interview was actually in Lion's Roar magazine. I don't think you have to be a subscriber to access it. In 2003, and the interviewer was, and I imagine if you put this in your browser, it's John Malkin, Malkin. Yeah, there were a lot of interesting interviews with Ty around that time, so I imagine that, you might find some other things of interest there too.
Thank you. How can we know when we have done enough practice with deep listening and understanding to begin to act skillfully in the world where we are needed?
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question because, I think we have to really become in touch with our inner barometer of how we're feeling. I mean, that's been my experience that the practices that we do of bringing our mindfulness to the body in particular are so important because it's easy to get agitated. It's easy, and it's also easy for our thoughts to tell us one thing and not to be in tune with the fact that we may actually be becoming emotionally upset over something, that maybe we're not quite ready to deal with a particular situation yet. So, bringing mindfulness to the body and just noticing, am I calm? Am I at ease? A lot of the meditation practice we do, we relax the body and we begin to know, what does well-being feel like in my body? When I'm relaxed, how does it feel to be open? And, so I can notice even sometimes in my home, if I'm having a conversation with my husband and something kind of just doesn't quite land with me the right way. Fortunately, I've gotten much better over the years at early detection system to just noticing that suddenly there's a little bit of kind of like tensing up, because the mind can be saying, and there's that stereotypical, you know, remark about women, the husband will say, how are you doing? Fine. Everything's fine, but it's not really fine. And we know inside, how that feels. So I think getting in touch with your body is really important. Are you able to read about this issue, to talk with people about it without feeling that you're getting emotional about it? And so maybe it's a bit of a dance to start stepping into something in a way. Maybe we're not prepared to go to public meetings or debates about an issue, but maybe we write some letters or we do some other things. But, I think the opportunity to deeply listen to people without even having to be in a position to respond can be helpful too. We might find that we're listening to someone deeply. It could be a friend giving us some feedback that's uncomfortable for us, or it could be somebody with a different political position. But I think that practice of just practicing deep listening where I hear this person, and even though I feel uncomfortable while I'm listening, I'm able to remain stable. Maybe I feel like there's a little bit of a closing up, I open again, just continue to come back, to open, to care about the other person and what they're saying, and to really believe that that's truly important. to know and to understand the other person. So I'd say those are skills that we can develop, sort of on our home ground before we necessarily have to take them out to bigger fields. And all the practice that we do with difficult people in our lives, or just difficult situations can help prepare us to step out into those other situations.
This next one's a little bit more of a comment. Thank you so much, Angie. I find you're using the term dead zone for the past and present particularly helpful. Do you want to say any more of that?
I never actually thought of that term before until I read Ty say it. I thought that was great. Dead zone. Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about being conscious and being unconscious. And so I'm used to sort of looking at it from that perspective that we are either awake and present, which means, we're fully here, present, hearing, receptive, or we're lost in thought. And there's, gradations of that. But he says, many people, somebody who goes, the person who was driving the car, it was so sad this week, the road rage, and just got angry and took out a gun over a simple misunderstanding and shoots and kills somebody. I mean, he was unconscious. And sometimes people that are unconscious, we have to do things as a society to protect the rest of society. But it's sad that people operate under these different levels of unconsciousness or dead zones. Maybe as you speak in a dead zone, there's no life, there's no engagement. There's simply, the oppression of terrible suffering, I'm sure, of this person who would do something like that.
Related to what you just mentioned and the previous question as well, how do we address the extreme and harmful lies people believe?
I'm sorry, the extreme and what?
And harmful lies people believe.
Yeah, it's sometimes we say, I can't believe they would believe that. I can't believe they would do that. And sometimes the things that they're doing, there need to be repercussions for, and there needs to be understanding. But I mean, obviously, when somebody is doing something that people always feel justified for what they do. They think that they're right. They think there's a reason. And it's hard to believe sometimes. It's like, how could anybody possibly think that? And yet they do. And so obviously, we have to protect society, and when lies are being spread that are hurting people's lives, that are creating violence in our country, yeah, it needs to be stopped. But as all our teachers tell us, and most of all, Fred, we don't stop things with anger. We need to do it firmly. And sometimes we need to take actions that our Buddhist teachers tell us are fierce, but fierce doesn't mean angry. Fierce may mean, yeah, we need to say, no, this cannot happen and we need to stop something. But we don't do it from anger, because when we do something from anger, we're not thinking clearly. We're not compassionate. We're not understanding. And we're oftentimes not helping the situation. So yes, we act, but first we take care of the anger in ourselves before we act, so that we act from a place of compassion. And sometimes the compassionate thing to do may be that someone has to be incarcerated, or something else has to happen. But, when we are not acting from anger, we can be clear and wise and decide what is the compassionate and wise thing to do in this situation. So, okay. Yeah, so Maggie's going to share. We have an Earth Holder group that some of you may or may not be familiar with, that Andrew Rock has been very involved with, that practices to protect the environment in a very Buddhist manner. So Maggie's going to share something that Andrew has shared in that regard.
So thank you, Angie, for reminding us that the meditation hall is not separate from the world, that practice is not separate from action. People may know that there is an Earth Holder community within the wider Plum Village community, and that we have started a Florida Earth Holder group here. If you would like to participate, please contact Andrew Rock. I will put his email in the chat for you all. So thank you. A question.
That, thank you, Maggie, is that just reminding all members that we have something called the FCM Forum, which is an alternative to Facebook, really. There's no outside involvement, no advertising, no sharing of information, but it's a place that we set up, and there's a link in Mindfulness Matters each week that we can go and talk about and share these activities that we're involved in. And there is an environmental justice channel in there where we can post these types of events. So for more information about what Andrew just shared, or about if you have things that you're involved in to help the world and you'd like your Sangha brothers and sisters to know about it, because people are very interested and do want to connect and do want to help, please go to the FCM forum and share about it there as well.
Another question. Over-consuming news can often be a source of watering unwholesome seeds. Have you found a balance with regard to your practice of keeping up with the news and any sources that do not fan the flames of your anger?
Full disclosure. Before leading up to the election, and honestly, until it was certified, I have to admit, I just found I was glued to the New York Times online, and it was feeling toxic. And yet I continued to do it. And I knew it was unhealthy, but like what's happening now? What's happening now? And it was such a wonderful example for me of feeding unwholesome seeds with media consumption. At some point, I finally turned it off. And it was like going cold turkey, and it felt so much better. And I've heard a lot of other people say they felt like they could sort of turn off the news a little bit since that happened. They feel a little bit on safer ground these days, and it feels better. In terms of what to consume, I don't know. I think it's difficult. I think as I think the person mentioned, it's both a question of what you're reading and also how often you're reading it. To me, I think it was more of a quantity issue than it was even quality. I mean, tend to read the New York Times online, but I also feel like they have a bit of a cancel culture mentality sometimes, to be honest with you. I felt like, you know, there, and they do have different views there, but I wanted to read some things that balance. So I tried reading Wall Street Journal editorials for a while. I wasn't developed enough to keep up that practice, I don't think. I listen to NPR. I find that to be fairly responsible and nourishing. But what's been most helpful for me is just to check it once or twice a day, and that's it. It's too much, I think, for most of us to just go down that rabbit hole. I mean, I'm sure other people have ideas and practices that they can share, and I've read The Guardian. I mean, there are a lot of different places, but I do find in most things I read online, there's a bit of sensationalism. They're selling news. So I think we have to be wise consumers. We have to stop and just not, maybe time limit ourselves on it and just really kind of reflect on what we're ingesting and practice the 4 nutriments. So anything else from the hall or anyone else before we close for this morning? Well, again, I thank you. Wish you a joyful and beautiful day and spring wherever you happen to be. And as we again move into hopefully more of a season of emergence and re-engagement, may we all find our Buddha fields to engage in a way that's beautiful and meaningful for us. That's the creative thing. We can all do something very different. But again, we all also know the importance of being in the hall together and Sangha as just such a truly important support for us in whatever we do. So thank you.